There's a difference between a spiritual battle and a natural battle. Yet, sometimes we find it hard to distinguish the difference because, well, they both can take an emotional toll. When we don't feel well, it's tough to pray. When we can't find answers, we start to despair, which, by the way, is a sin against hope. As a high-achieving woman, it is my guess that if you haven't been challenged by a health struggle caused by your body as a result of chronic stress yet, you know someone who has. So grab a pen and paper because this week you're going to learn some basic principles for natural Catholic living so that you have more to give the next time a physical, emotional, or spiritual battle arises.
Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Persistence in Prayer podcast hosted by Catholic mindset coach, wife, mother, educator, and speaker Kylie Hine. Kylie is passionate about helping you deepen your relationship with God through the power of prayer. This podcast is a space for high achievers who want to do it all, but also want to prioritize their spiritual life and grow in faith. Join us as we explore the beauty of persistence in prayer and the transformative impact it can have on our lives. Get ready to discover practical tips, insights, and inspiration to help you develop a daily prayer practice and cultivate a deeper sense of trust in God's plan for your life. Let's journey together towards a more fulfilled and faithful life as we invite the Holy Spirit in. Let's begin.
This week, I am joined by Katie and Diane. A little bit different this week. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, but I met Katie through the Natural Catholic Women group that Katie and Diane have started and joined her as a guest host on her live First Saturday's Rosary and became a follower of her group. I love the work that these two ladies are doing to help encourage women to heal their health in a natural way. Katie and Diane, thank you so much for being here. Do you want to go ahead and start and introduce yourself, and you guys can kind of share how this journey started and what it is that you do for Catholic women?
Sure. I'm Katie. I am a Catholic wife, mom, and I'm actually a full-time lawyer. So I became really passionate about natural wellness because of my own PCOS diagnosis, not really knowing anything about it. Took a really long time to even get diagnosed in the first place. And, with all the stress of, I know we're going to talk more about stress, but like college and law school and the bar exam, and then working for a big law firm and litigation, it just, really took a toll on my health. So finding holistic natural wellness has really helped me. So that's why we started our Natural Catholic Women Facebook group and why I'm on Instagram educating women, because there's just still so many people who don't know about hormone health and how to help themselves. So that's a little bit about me and what I do.
Awesome. So glad to have you here. And Diane, what about you?
So my name is Diane. I'm a full-time accountant, actually. So I'm a lawyer and an accountant. And I'm married. I've been married for about 5.5 years. And I got really involved in this natural wellness journey when we started trying to conceive, my husband and I, over 4.5 years ago, and came through all of this journeying to find out that I had endometriosis and PCOS. And I didn't know anything about either of those conditions. I think endometriosis especially, I saw several doctors and had several surgeries, and just more recently uncovered all of this, what seems like underground information about endo. And I just really am passionate about natural wellness because these conditions, PCOS and endometriosis, endo can be treated by excision surgery, but a lot of the cures to PCOS and endo are all lifestyle related. And there's not really, other than slapping birth control pill on either of those problems, there's not much that we're taught from, maybe our primary care doctor, if we go to them, about these conditions and how impactful lifestyle changes can be to both of those and several other conditions. So I've really been I'm an accountant, but I was actually pre-nursing in college and really liked biology, not the chemistry piece. That's actually what made me drop out and change my major. But I just love the biology about how our body works, especially as women and our cycle and just the beautiful changes that we have throughout our cycle. So I'd started listening to the Hormone Genius podcast a couple of years ago, and really, that's really where I started learning a lot more about my body and these conditions. And one of the co-hosts on that program also teaches women to be hormone coaches. And I was like, oh gosh, this is perfect. This is exactly, what I'm interested in. So I just went through that program, 6-month long program, and finished in March. So I'm in my certification piece, doing my practice hours, but working on my first client, but teaching women about their bodies and about natural wellness tips to solve their specific, really 3 pain points that we focus on. So, and Katie and I met through a pro-life organization. We're both on the board. And she had this awesome idea. She called me up and said, let's do a Facebook group. So we started it up, and I've just been, thanks to Katie. Katie does most of the heavy lifting. I'm here for support, but she does a lot of the networking to grow the group to the size that it's become and get the reach that we have so far.
Thank you both for being vulnerable and sharing your struggles and your stories. And I would love it. There are probably women listening who, like you, didn't know what PCOS or endometriosis are. Can you just explain what those 2 things are, and maybe what some of the common symptoms that women may have that they don't recognize are related to those 2 things?
Sure. So endometriosis is where tissue that's like the lining of our uterus grows on the outside of our uterus, most commonly in the pelvic cavity. It could happen really anywhere in your body, though I've heard endometriosis growing in people's noses and their brains and their diaphragm, which is less common, but it can occur anywhere, but most commonly in the pelvic region. And what's so interesting about endo is that there's multiple stages. There's stage 1 through 4 in severity. And it really depends. Your symptoms will depend on how your body reacts to it, which I think is why it makes it such a complicated disease. So somebody could have stage 4 endometriosis where their pelvic cavity is just covered in it, and they might not have any symptoms. And that's because their body might see these cells and not react to them. Where somebody that has stage 1, that's very limited endo, and their body has a more reactionary response to what are these cells that don't belong here, inflammatory response, and they have a lot more symptoms. But the most common symptoms of endo are heavy, painful periods, like stabbing pain, I think is what it's often like. That's what I had. And heavy and painful periods are it can be other things as well, but they're not normal. We're definitely supposed to have discomfort and maybe some pain. Our energy level naturally decreases during that time, but very heavy and painful periods are not normal, and it can be a sign of an underlying condition like endo or PCOS actually. So with endo, there's other kind of weird other symptoms, and another common one is sciatic pain. But those are kind of the pelvic pain, like chronic pelvic pain is really the biggest one. And then PCOS is a hormonal imbalance, really, disease or condition.
Yeah, I'm actually reading a book on PCOS right now. That's my goals for the year, to read as much as I can about PCOS so that I can first of all, learn for myself and continue my own healing journey, but also to share with other people. So typically you're going to have higher levels of male hormones, which is androgens like testosterone. Or you could have 2 of 3 significant symptoms, which would be high male hormones, like we just mentioned, ovarian cysts, and irregular period. And for me, one of the reasons why it took so long, I think, for me to be diagnosed is because I actually did not have ovarian cysts. So I think that's a myth, because PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome, but you don't actually have to have ovarian cysts to have PCOS. It's very much connected in many cases with insulin resistance. So high levels of insulin, acne, facial hair, unwanted facial hair, um, excess weight in your belly area. There's so many symptoms that come with it. And I can look back now and see how any sort of health issue I've had was really related to PCOS. And I had no clue.
That's so fascinating. And I think that what is difficult is there are so many conditions now for women and they have overlapping symptoms. So it can be really difficult to diagnose. But just like you guys have mentioned before, we don't know what we don't know. And we're not great about being taught, or our culture isn't great about teaching us about these things and how to care for our body. But one of the underlying factors that I have found in my own health journey, and you two have both shared, is that stress impacts our overall health and can lead to some of these conditions. Will you guys share a little bit about how stress maybe impacted your overall health? And how does stress relate to hormones that can lead to some of these female conditions?
So I think the biggest thing with me and stress in especially the last 3 years, was work related. We had some couple acquisitions happen and bringing together multiple companies with different cultures. And it's been a lot of emotional stress, but also work, just having a higher workload. And one of the chronic things that I have, which is also another symptom of PCOS, is low progesterone. And this is something that I've had I probably had it my whole life, but really I was diagnosed or found out that I had low progesterone in 2020. That's when I got my first panel of blood tests where I got diagnosed with PCOS. And how this relates to stress is that cortisol, which is our stress hormone, and progesterone come from the same precursor. So with cortisol being our stress hormone, it's released anytime our body anticipates that we are in a stressful situation. Where a long time ago, before we had computers and people sending maybe rude emails, it would be our body we'd be getting chased by a bear, right? We're getting chased by a bear. Our body pumps cortisol. And what that does is limits basically a lot of the other functions in our body that are not needed for survival. And one of them being your reproductive health. So if you're being chased by a bear, your body's like, I don't need to reproduce right now. I have to survive, right? I need to get away from this bear. So in a situation now we have today where we're not getting chased by a bear, probably most of us, but we might be getting stressful emails multiple times a day, or phone calls, or just being in stressful situations, whether that be work or family or friends or kids, is that we're getting that cortisol pumping through our body more regularly. And if you have that happening on a regular basis, your body will always prioritize cortisol over progesterone. So because once again, that need to survive. So if you have this happening constantly, then your cortisol could be robbing your progesterone, and you can have chronic progesterone. And why progesterone is important for our cycle health is that during the second half of our cycle, called our luteal phase, that's what holds our uterine lining intact. So for reproductive health, in order for our lining of our uterus to stay healthy and solid and allow time for implantation of a potential embryo, we have to have that lining intact. Our progesterone has to be high. And it usually lasts 10 to 15 days. So a lot of women that have low progesterone issues, they have what's called a luteal phase defect, where their luteal phase isn't long enough and doesn't allow for enough time for implantation, and people can have issues with getting pregnant. And that can also cause irregular cycles, really long cycles. Like PCOS is usually longer cycles. So 30, 40, 50, or not having periods at all. A lot of women don't have periods at all. So it's kind of my immediate reaction to your question, is that robbing of progesterone and how that can lead to issues in our fertility cycle.
Yeah. Katie, if you have anything to add, otherwise, could you just paint us a picture of what a typical day looks like for you in your high stress days before you knew what the effects of stress were on your body, how it was affecting your infertility and your overall health?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, I would probably start the day with a huge cup of coffee on an empty stomach, which now I know about hormones, that is a no-no. And probably have maybe a more sugary type of breakfast. And then, rush off to class. So kind of stressed to get there. And then kind of just spending my day very sedentary, studying, drinking more coffee throughout the day, drinking Diet Coke. I used to joke that I would put an IV of Diet Coke in my arm if I could. And I definitely do not drink Diet Coke anymore. I still like a little bit of coffee, but not all day, every day. And just especially when exams would come around. And I guess I should say too, staying up late, right? Like staying up late studying. I think not really having good morning and evening routines, like a morning routine to kind of help set yourself up for the day to be calm and not stress and just kind of have more of a plan for the day instead of just getting to class and then just study. And then having a really nice, like, calming wind down routine to help me get better sleep. I was younger then, so my body could handle it better than it could in my 30s, which is when things started to kind of show up for me, the problems of PCOS, more so in terms of my ability to just have quality of life. I mean, not that I was so bad off, but just like the fatigue, extreme fatigue, not being able to sleep through the night, feeling very anxious all the time, having skin issues and just, not feeling good about the way I looked and not really having the energy to exercise. And then when my periods came around, that was pretty debilitating, very painful. Even back in law school, I remember having very debilitating, painful periods. But I think outside of law school, at least in law school, I had community where we would exercise together or just even having people to talk to kind of relieve that stress. But then when I went into work in a big law firm environment, where you have to bill lots of hours, like you guys may have seen Sue, wasn't like that. But, still it's like, or The Good Wife, it's like it's very competitive. You're working very long hours. You have a bunch of partners throwing work at you all the time that you have to kind of prioritize and manage. And a lot of times it's sink or swim. You have to basically figure things out for yourself. And of course, I had very supportive people that I worked with as well, but it was very much that type of environment. So I would say it definitely got worse when I went into law firm, and that's why I feel passionate. I would love to. I think I probably will go back to my law school at some point and talk to the law students to explain to them that you can't ignore your health for your career. I thought I was just, I was very driven, and I'm still driven, but, very driven in my 20s, like, got this big law firm job. I got to make it. I got to make partner at all costs for my health. Doesn't matter, like work day and night, not taking breaks, I can do it, not really having vacations, so really not having a lot of wind down time. But I think the biggest lesson I've learned is the importance of routine, like creating those healthy self-care routines for yourself, especially having a good morning routine and a good evening routine. And I'll be honest, I have the evening routine down pretty well. In the morning, though, like getting a kid rushed off to school, during the school year, I feel like that I know what I should be doing. Do I always do it? No, but I think that's okay. That's part of the process, right? Like little by little, taking baby steps, we don't have to be perfect, but learning and knowing what we should be doing, like what our goals are, and then kind of taking baby steps or like developing one habit at a time to get there. Like, so now, for example, I really love waking up with a warm glass of water and lemon, and like putting a little sea salt in it to start my day. There's health benefits to that. And, taking my dog for a walk in the morning or doing my weightlifting, which by the way is really good for PCOS in the morning, to kind of get me relaxed. Exercise is really good for stress management. And, spending some time listening to the Bible in a Year podcast, or if I wasn't doing that, maybe I'd do like the daily mass reading, through Hallow or Magnificat. And I like to have a morning smoothie to kind of pack a bunch of nutrients in one drink and not have to worry about making more elaborate breakfast. It's just easier time saving for me. And having that before facility. So to try to prevent, the cortisol spike from that. Because my understanding, I'm not a hormone coach, but just from what I've read, my understanding is stress having an impact on cortisol can then impact your blood sugar levels and PCOS. That is a huge problem with PCOS, is maintaining healthy insulin levels, blood sugar levels. So when you have PCOS, anything you can do to try to keep your blood sugar in check. A lot of it is the healthy lifestyle choices like nutrition, exercise, supplements, reducing the toxins in your environment, getting good sleep, working on your stress level, all those things can really help. So that's what I'm focused on now, when I really wasn't then. Then it was like, get the assignment done for the partner, get the good grade, get that like thumbs up, get that next big job. Now it's like, obviously I want to please my employer and do a good job and be a good mom, but it's also like, I need to make sure I'm taking care of myself because I just turned 40. I do not want to be a 50, 60, 70-year-old who's having to be taken care of or doesn't have good quality of life. So I'm considering my 40s my wellness decade. That's where I'm going.
That's amazing. I think so often our health starts to dwindle and we don't really notice it at first. Like we don't realize how bad it is until we have a good day. And I know I would go weeks at a time and then I'd have a day where I felt like myself. And I was like, oh my goodness, I did not realize how bad I actually felt. I want to go back to a couple of things you said. One of them was you were talking about caffeine. You're talking about having coffee in the morning on an empty stomach. Either of you can jump in on this, on maybe what are the effects of caffeine and why we need to maybe monitor it or limit it. I taught in a high school and I coached volleyball. I cannot tell you the number of extremely high caffeinated drinks that I saw high school kids drinking. I would see middle schoolers with coffee in the morning, sometimes even younger. Why is that something that we need to pay attention to, not only for ourselves, but also for our kids?
That's a good point. I think Diane might be able to talk more about the science behind it, but I just know that too much caffeine can definitely wreak havoc on your hormones. I know people can disagree. Some people say, don't drink coffee, drink matcha instead. I read this really good book, Essential Oil Hormone Solution, and I highly recommend that to anybody. And our Diane's read it too. We talk about it in our Natural Catholic Women Facebook group. I know she says maybe swap out the coffee for decaf or for matcha, which has a lower caffeine count and also has other health benefits. I think for me personally, I just love the smell of coffee. I love the taste of it. So I personally have gone to at least like a half cup, kind of a mushroom coffee type of blend, and I enjoy that. But then that's it. I'm not drinking it throughout the day. My understanding is it can spike your cortisol levels and just kind of throw your hormones unbalanced. And I've seen that written multiple places. And in terms of kids, I just think I'm not an expert, but if it's not great for us women, I can't imagine it's any better for children. And at least with my daughter, I'm very careful about trying to avoid processed drinks. So like the really processed sugary beverages. She really enjoys water with a clean flavored electrolyte. And she actually requests that when we go to a restaurant. Mom, do you have your electrolytes with you? Oh, shoot, I forgot. Oh, yeah. So that's a really good point. I mean, what our habits that we're forming, it's not just for us. Our children are watching us. That's who they're going to model themselves after. So if we don't take care of ourselves and create these healthy habits for ourselves, how can you expect that our kids are going to do that? when they grow up. And at least for me, why I really want to get a really good hold on understanding PCOS and educating about it, because I'm hoping that I can prevent her from having to go through all the things that I've gone through. And thankfully, I'm relatively healthy, okay? Like, it's not like it's been so bad, but still, you don't want to see your child suffer every single month or have skin issues or all these things that I've experienced, for fatigue and the mental health, feeling so anxious and all those things. We just don't want that for them. You don't want them to live in a state of stress. You want them to be healthy. So I think that's a huge part of it for me, is trying to help her see, like, this is how you should be living your life, and having her emulate that. I read somewhere, when you work out at home, that's a great thing to do, because then your children are seeing that, so they understand that should be a part of your lifestyle. So with my daughter, at the very least, we'll go on evening walks after dinner to walk our dog, which, by the way, that's also good for your blood sugar levels, is to go for walks after meals. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I would say definitely everything in moderation, right? But I think like a cup of coffee is not going to be super detrimental. I'm actually sensitive to caffeine. All growing up, my mom was. We weren't allowed to have caffeinated beverages. And then when I got out of the house in college, I was like, yeah, I can have whatever I want, right? And I still really only had a cup of coffee a day after I moved out of the dorm, or out of the dorm into a house with actually lived in a house with 11 other girls from the rowing team, and they always had coffee in the morning. So I would have a cup of coffee. But in my 20s, realized that my heart rate would just randomly like skyrocket for not after having caffeine or anything. And I was told to not have caffeine, and been fine ever since. But I think that caffeine adds, Katie mentioned, impacts cortisol, and especially caffeine later in the day. So your cortisol is the highest naturally when you wake up in the morning. That's what wakes you up, is cortisol. And then over the course of the day, your cortisol levels should naturally decrease and be at their lowest before bed. So in addition to potentially disrupting your sleep, having caffeine later in the day can spike your cortisol. And I think coffee can be tricky, because there are so much coffee out there that's not clean. It can have like fungus in it, even though you don't see it. And actually, decaf coffee, the way that it goes through the decaffeination process, can be toxic. They put chemicals in it. There's what's called a Swiss water method. That's the best way to have decaffeinated coffee. They do it in a non-toxic way. There's limited places that do it, but I think like Pete's Coffee is one of them, Caribou Coffee, I think Tim Hortons. But so if anybody drinks decaf coffee on a regular basis and you're worried about toxins, just look up the Swiss water method and see if your coffee of choice impacted by that. That was really eye-opening to me, because that's what I drink, right? I couldn't drink regular coffee anymore. And then I think with the energy drinks are just crazy to me, because so many of them have so much sugar. And if that's what somebody's waking up in the morning, like a high schooler or even college students, and maybe they don't eat breakfast and that's all they have is caffeine and sugar, it's just so hard on your body from a cortisol perspective, from a blood sugar perspective. Really eating any kind of sugar or carbs naked on an empty stomach can be really hard on your blood sugar, especially if it's every day repeated. And I think caffeine with kids, I haven't actually read up on this, but my first impact is like, okay, well, if caffeine impacts your hormones and your cortisol, and cortisol impacts other hormones, like we talked about, and especially for women or even men or boys developing hormones, they're in the process of developing bodies, and their hormones are trying to get in sync. If you throw caffeine into that mix, that can definitely have an impact.
Yeah. And no one, just so you know, listeners, no one's asking you to give up your coffee. We're not saying don't drink it. I know I still rely on caffeine, not in the same way I used to. I'm not drinking Dr. Pepper at 2 a.m. to finish my master's papers. Thank goodness. But I know for me, sometimes caffeine is the thing that keeps me from being a cranky mom because I struggle with chronic fatigue. So it's one of those things, just be aware. Be aware of what you're putting into your body and the potential effects that it has on your body. Diane, you brought up rowing in college. I'm curious, as an athlete, if you knew back then what you know now, what would you have done differently in training or just overall general care for your body?
Oh, that's a great question. So rowing, I mean, definitely the best decision that I made in college. I was in such great shape, made lasting friendships, and just had a great time. It kept me out of, I think, probably it kept me being a good student. I think when I have more extracurricular stuff to do, especially I did this in high school too, I was a better student as long as it was a good balance, right? But it rowing, and that was the most intense workouts that I've ever done. And I was definitely a lot of stress in my body at the time. I don't know if I would have known what I know now. I think I probably at least would have been more graceful on myself and knowing my cycle a little more. During your period, your energy is going to be lower, and having to do a really intense workout, regardless of what day it is, it doesn't matter, was challenging, right? And some days I'm like, just like, what is wrong with me? I'm weak today, or I'm just not feeling it, or I'm just so demotivated. Like, do I not like this anymore? Am I sick? What's going on? And if I would have had that awareness of knowing that that's completely normal to have lower energy and not be motivated, and maybe I would not have tried or pushed to my limits. I think even as a whole boat of women, if we had that awareness, I think that would be really helpful. Like, okay, I have to choose to do two weightlifting workouts this week. When I'm going to do it, it would be nice to do it on the day that was not day one or day two of my period if I had that choice, right? And like having a coach having that awareness, and my teammates having that awareness, it would be a beautiful thing. But I think similar to what Katie was saying about her life in college and in her early career, I had a lot of late nights, especially I was in public accounting for 7 years. And that I was resonating a lot with what you were saying, Katie, like just working really hard, working really late, not eating right for sure. I mean, knowing what I know now about nutrition in college and in my 20s, I think would have been a game changer. I definitely have had insulin resistance and insulin issues. I mean, I ate a pretty well-rounded diet, but once you leave home and you go to college and you have this whole cafeteria full of whatever the heck you want to eat, candy and whatever, I think I probably would have gotten to where I am now, which is balancing my blood sugar. And I know that's come up a few times. I'm just so passionate about that. I could go on and on about blood sugar and how I think all of us should know the tips and tricks for how to balance it. I'm curious if I would be in the position that I am today with the hormonal imbalance that I have, if I knew all of that earlier on. And an awareness about birth control. I was on it for 10 years. I had really painful, irregular cycles as a teen. And that was kind of the answer for a while. And, my mom meant multiple times was like, maybe you should try, just take a break from it. And I'm like, I don't want to deal with that and like feel awful while I'm studying and rowing and doing all these things. And I wish I would have listened to her or known that that's all the impacts that this could have on, 10 years of impacts that had on my body that I didn't know about. That was masking my PCOS and endo. So, yeah.
I love that you said masking because we're often given things, whether it's something like birth control or for other health related issues, where it masks the symptoms. It doesn't solve the problem. And I think it was you, Diane, that had mentioned there are so many things in our culture that we just aren't educated on. We don't know. We go to the doctor and we trust that person because they're the person with the degree. Do you guys have any questions that maybe we should be asking more often when we go to the person that we are trusting with our health?
Yes, I would say, I mean, as it relates to birth control, especially for young women or women with kids who are young and they're just starting their cycles and they're noticing issues, painful, irregular cycles. And if they go to their pediatrician and I say, this is the problem, many pediatricians, how they're trained is that birth control that is the solution to something like that, all hormone related issues like that for women and even young girls and teenagers. And I think if people knew to even ask the question of, is there another option? Like, what other option do I have? And they might not know the answer, but that's at least they say there is no other option. And is that something that we should accept as an answer? Well, find someone, right? Find another doctor who has an alternative solution. How often in our health, if for anything, is there only one option? It's just very interesting that's, like you said, we trust them. And that's the answer that they give. Well, that must be the treatment, right? Not knowing that there are so many other options out there and ways that we can be treated. And there are doctors out there that are trained in that, but not your average pediatrician, right? Or not your average primary care doctor. So I think in general, with multiple things, is like, what other solutions are there? Or is there any lifestyle changes that I can make? Or is there a referral to somebody that would have more information about this, more specialized? I would say this with endo as well. And that the doctors that I was talking to about this early on, I had kind of a unique circumstance because I had a high CA1, it's called the CA125 test, which could be an indication of cancer. So I ended up going to the cancer doctor. But some of the doctors that I was talking to early on were like, oh yeah, I'll do surgery on you. I'll do endometriosis surgery on you. And I wish I would have said, how often do you do surgery for endometriosis? What specific specialization do you have in this? Endo is not something that an average OBGYN should just be doing surgery on. It's way too complicated. And just like you wouldn't have your primary care doctor do a heart surgery for you, you wouldn't have somebody with endo have surgery done by their regular OBGYN. And I think I didn't know enough about it. And they were didn't even think twice. I think a lot of women actually have the opposite problem. Like, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. You're crazy. You don't have, right? That's the opposite end. And they're told that everything that's going on is normal. Where mine was the opposite. I had people saying, I'll do surgery, no problem. But they were not necessarily people that were specialized in endo.
Yeah, I definitely agree. We need to do a better job of advocating for ourselves. That doesn't mean you can't trust your doctor, but there's nothing wrong with asking questions and getting clarity. Katie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So for me, going to the doctor now is a totally different experience than before I became interested and passionate about holistic wellness. I used to go to the doctor and just tell them my symptoms and think that they would tell me what I can do about it, right? And now, by the way, I really love my doctors. They're very well-meaning, but I also see holistic type of practitioners. It was actually a holistic nutritionist who helped me discover that I had PCOS, and she helped me come up with the lab test and like the hormone test to ask for. And I know that working with someone like Diane, for example, who's a hormone coach, I mean, they have that training and that knowledge that they can actually help you advocate for yourself with the doctor, because I just think knowledge is power, right? And I also kind of consider myself someone who, now that I know I have PCOS, because I had the hormone testing done, which, by the way, that's another reason I really wasn't diagnosed for a long time. They kept giving me blood tests, like lab work, which never showed any hormone imbalance. And then when I got the saliva test, it was the saliva testing that showed PCOS in combination with getting my fasting insulin tested, and that was super high. So that's really how I got diagnosed, was working with someone like Diane who can help me advocate for myself. But now I am avidly reading books about PCOS, learning as much as I can so I can also be my own advocate with the knowledge that I have.
If you guys had to summarize or give your top 3 health tips for whether it's regulating blood sugars or just overall wellness, if you had to condense it down to 3 things that anyone could implement starting tomorrow, what would they be?
Well, I would say the first thing is nutrition. I think food is medicine. That's a totally different mindset that I've adopted since becoming passionate about natural wellness and walking along my natural healing journey. And so there's lots of different schools of thought on diet and things like that. But the word I keep hearing over and over again is anti-inflammatory. Anti-inflammatory. You can use the word diet, but it's basically eating clean, whole food, especially that you're cooking at home. The more that you're cooking at home, you know what the ingredients are that you're putting into your food. You know you're not going to be cooking with probably like vegetable oil or canola oil, all those seed oils that are very highly processed. Think back to how our great grandparents were probably cooking and making their food. Like mine were from Italy, right? So they're like using olive oil and tomatoes and, just really healthy whole food. And then the second thing I would say is movement. And having PCOS for a long time, I felt really low energy. Like, how could I possibly have the energy to do these like hour-long, really intense workouts? And so I thought, well, why bother? I can't do that. And now I know, even just getting outside and walking after meals, 10 minutes after meals, or maybe take a half hour and go for a walk with your dog or your children or whoever, your spouse, whoever it may be, even just yourself. That is huge. Coupled with weightlifting, what I personally do to help with PCOS. And then the third thing I would say is one of the things I did right away when I found out I had PCOS and I started researching it is removing toxins from my environment. And it's really funny, talking about doctors. Like I said, I love my doctors, but I told them when I first started this journey, oh, I'm removing toxins from my environment. And so I looked at my chart later and they put like possible mold exposure, like something like in my house, not realizing I was talking about actually looking at my cleaning product and the products that I'm using on my body. What you put on your body goes in your body. And right, things like fragrance can contain hormone disrupting chemicals. I had no clue. So think about all the products you use every single day, like candles. That's why I got started using essential oils to help with, calmness and sleep and all that. Like all those things that you're putting on your body and you're exposed to every day, they add up, called toxic load. So I remember actually with Diane, I was on the phone with Diane or on a video call with Diane for that same nonprofit. It was right after I found out I had PCOS. I was actually going to have surgery to remove endometrial polyps. That's another thing that can happen with PCOS I wasn't aware of. And, I learned about the hormone disrupting chemicals and the dyes in our food and everything. So I was going around my house with the garbage bags, rolling stuff out. And you don't have that. You don't have to be as extreme as me. You can just kind of start swapping one thing at a time as it runs out. But I had surgery scheduled. I wanted to get my hormones in balance as quickly as possible. So I went around my whole house, throwing stuff out. I was then on a video call with Diane. My husband, he's on board now, but it's definitely been a journey, right? So he comes up to the door. I was sitting outside. He comes up to the door holding the bag. And I was on this video call with Diane. He's like, what's going on? Why are people step out? What's happening? So there's more to it, but I would say like that's at least where I started. So that's what I would say, or is a good place.
Yeah. And for anyone listening, just know it can be overwhelming. So hearing you talk about removing toxins, things with fragrance, one of the things I'm allergic to is phenol. And not only is phenol in 80 to 90% of our foods, it is also in many, many of the products that we use. Anything that has fragrance is high in phenol. So that has been something I have had to eliminate. It is incredibly daunting. I still have so many more things, and it's not something I can ever completely eliminate in my life. But like you talked about, overload. And so if we can minimize the amount of exposure that we have to some of those things, it can be a drastic change for our body. So I'll just recap those three. Number one, food is medicine. Try to eat clean if you can. Number two, move your body. Incorporate some kind of weightlifting or even just going for a walk. And number three, remove toxins, even if it's small things like swapping out your shampoo or taking candles and replacing them with essential oils. Diane, what would your top three be?
So I was going to say I'm going to have a hard time picking only three, but now I get to pick different ones. Since Katie had three, I would definitely second all of the things that she said. Nutrition's definitely one of the first and most impactful things that I've done on my wellness journey. I worked with a dietitian, and it changed my relationship with food. Especially like PCOS, people say it depends on who you talk to, right? Don't eat any carbs, eat whatever carbs you want, eat only certain carbs. And I just really struggled with that and with sugar. So I would say within the nutrition realm, agree with everything that Katie said, and blood sugar balancing. And I think learning about blood sugar balancing helped my relationship with food because it made me realize that having sweets every once in a while isn't a big deal, but making sure that you eat them at a time where it's not going to have such stress on your body and spike your blood sugar. So having a sweet is best after eating a blood sugar balancing meal. That's why we don't typically eat dessert before meals, right? And having a sweet within 20 minutes of finishing your meal will be the least impact on your blood sugar. And there's so many things in the blood sugar realm, but the top things that I think are probably the easiest, it's just an awareness thing, is food order. So eating fiber first, and then protein and fat, and then carbohydrate last. Like anybody can do that. It's just having that awareness of I have to consciously, when I sit down and eat a meal, I actually just had a really great meal over the weekend with my husband. I was eating my veggies, and he eats faster than I do. So he finished his veggies and he was on to they were lamb burgers. And he was like, "Oh my gosh, this is so good. Have you tried it yet?" And I'm like, "No, I'm so hard on my veggies." It's a conscious thing. I have to choose to do it, but it doesn't cost anything. It's a habit that you have to build, but it's pretty easy. And along with that is having fiber, fat, and protein with every meal. And healthy fat, I think that was probably the biggest change that I made in my diet, is that I was not eating like any healthy fat. And it's hard to get because it's really avocado, nuts and seeds, olives, olive oil, avocado oil, and fish. So especially fatty fish like salmon and mackerel and sardines. So it's hard to do, but it's something that eating healthy fat at every meal, and it keeps me full in between meals. I used to eat breakfast and get starving at like 10:30, like feel like I was going to die. I was so hungry. It was like the hungriest I would get throughout the day was in the middle of the morning. And now that I eat a blood sugar balancing diet with healthy fat, protein, and fiber, I don't get hungry in between meals anymore. And that's so good for your hormones too. And that's another thing. It's just an awareness. I mean, avocado is kind of expensive, right? But it's not you don't have to buy some big thing. It's just an awareness thing. So I'd say balancing blood sugar in the realm of nutrition, definitely one of the top ones for me. Stress management, and we're talking about stress. And I think what Katie was saying earlier about routines is what's so important for stress management, because if you get yourself in a place where you're already really stressed and you don't have any routines in place, it's hard to get yourself out of that acute situation, right? But if you have a routine, even if you have a non-stressful day, but you still are doing your stress management routine, that makes sure that you keep level, like that you're not going from like, I'm super relaxed to being really stressed, and knowing and practicing, if you are in an acute situation, what can I do? What calms me down? And everybody's so different. So something that I asked as a hormone coach when we're talking about stress is I ask, how does your body manifest stress? Everybody's different. And what are things that work for you? I don't want to give a bunch of people a bunch of ideas if they're looking for ideas, for sure. But I always ask first, what works for you that you know that works? And lately I've had a lot of people say going for walks, especially when it's nice out, right? And it's just not something that they maybe make a priority. But if you know that walking reduces your stress, and you can set that as a routine, if that's first thing in the morning, if that's during lunch, if that's after dinner, after meals is always a plus, right? That helps blood sugar balance. But building those routines, for me, I have a morning routine with prayer and a gratitude journal and deep breathing exercise with a book. It's called Breath as Prayer. I love that book. I'm almost all the way through it. So I don't know what I'm going to do after I'm done with it, but it has a little like devotional, and then it has you say things in an inhale and an exhale. And I do that with essential oils. And I think deep breathing in general has been really good for me. I try to do it during lunch and at the end of my workday, and notice a considerable difference with my mood, especially like my husband says in the evening. I think when I stop working, either at home, I work at home and in the office, and I get home and I don't do deep breathing, or like I do a surrender prayer where I say, I surrender, but I didn't get done today. I surrender that really awkward or that tense conversation I had with a coworker today. I just surrender it all. And I want to move on with my evening and enjoy my evening with my husband. And on days that I do that, my husband says that it's a considerable difference in my mood. I'm just lighter, more like myself, and not still grinding through what I didn't get done in my head while I'm making dinner or while we're doing whatever in the evening. So I'd say stress management as the second thing, and then sleep would be the third. For me, I think that we don't prioritize sleep enough as a society, at least in the US, maybe in Europe, they're better at it. Sleep is so important that's how our bodies recover from physically, mentally, emotionally. And I think having a good go back to routines. And I know Katie mentioned having a routine at night. Having a routine before bed is so helpful for having a good night of sleep and making sure that you get good, solid sleep. And actually, speaking of blood sugar again with sleep, if you get less than 6 hours of sleep, you actually are insulin resistant the next day, because the way that the two hormones that impact your hunger, and they get out of balance if you don't get more than 6 hours of sleep. So that's always I try to get 7 to 8, but I know that 6 is definitely like try to get at least that. And if you don't, and I mean, obviously people have small children and things come up, but having that awareness that if you're like, I'm really craving sweets today, why is that? Well, oh, it's because I didn't sleep enough is really helpful. So sleep, very important in having that routine and getting good solid sleep.
I agree so much with all these things that you said. So again, recap, you talked about food, learning about blood sugar, understanding food order. Can you tell us again what the food order was? You said fiber first, and then what was the next order?
Yep. And then protein and fat. I think those are kind of interchangeable, and then carbs last. And the reason it's fiber first, there's a scientific reason. So if anybody's really interested in blood sugar, there's a woman who has an Instagram page called the Glucose Goddess, and she has so much content. She has an email newsletter too, where she does like YouTube videos, and it kind of explains all that. But she explains the science behind what fiber does molecularly and why that slows down blood sugar spikes. So fiber first, and then protein and fat second, and then carbs last.
Awesome. And then second was stress management. So making sure that you have a stress management routine. And lastly, prioritizing sleep. You guys have been so wonderful. I always end an episode with my guests sharing either a prayer tip or a scripture verse. So, Katie, you shared Numbers chapter 6, verses 24 through 26. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord let his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord look upon you kindly and give you peace. Why do you love that verse?
Well, when my daughter was little, I read, I think it was on Elatea or one of those sites about how parents can bless their children. And so I pray that as a prayer of protection over my daughter every single night, because one of the things I struggle with is anxiety over her safety and health. And so that gives me a lot of peace. And the really cool thing about that is a friend of mine came to visit and stayed the night with her daughter. And my friend said to my daughter, what's your bedtime routine, or what's something you do with your mom before bed? And she repeated the prayer for her. And so that was just so special to me, because I think that's something that makes her feel loved and, cherished. And I think that's something that she'll remember for a long time. So that's really special. And I just recently heard it in Numbers in the Bible in a Year podcast. So that was really cool to hear it in the actual context, because this is the first time I'm actually reading the whole Old Testament, going through the Bible in a year context. So that would be a prayer tip. I mean, I know it's listening to the gospel, but the Father Mike has prayer intertwined in the podcast, and it's just been really great. So some of your listeners may have already done the Bible in a year, but if they haven't, I'm a huge fan.
Or you can always do it again. I think there's always something more. You can always go back again and again. Diane, do you have any prayer tips or prayer practices that have been really beneficial or helpful in your life? I love the breathing. Sometimes we forget to breathe in our day. So breathing and incorporating that into your prayer, I think, is beautiful.
Yeah, so another prayer that I say every day that I think has really changed and helped me manage the situation that I have with work, especially from an emotional perspective, is that every day I ask for a kind, patient, merciful, and understanding heart. And I think that goes a long way with me throughout my day as situations arise with dealing with people that have different culture, working culture than I'm used to, and getting, easily frustrated. It's a great way for me to remember that throughout the day as those situations arise, to say, I want to have a merciful, patient heart for those, especially those that I struggle with. And I think in general, it helps me have that humility. Another thing that I would love to do every day, I haven't incorporated on a regular basis, is the litany of humility. And I think that small prayer it kind of goes to that a little bit and helps me think outside myself and remember that everybody here are brothers and sisters in Christ and are made in God's image. So that's been really helpful for me over the last 6 months, I would say.
I love the litany of humility. It truly reveals the places where we feel protective and where we don't want to change.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much for being here. This has been fantastic. Can you share with our listeners where they can find you? Obviously, there's the Facebook group called Natural Catholic Women. Make sure you go check that out. Katie and Diane, too, I think, are you guys also on Instagram?
Yes, I am Natural Catholic Mom, all one word on Instagram.
And I'm Restoration Hormone, that's the name of my hormone coaching business.
I will link all of those in the show notes if anyone needs help connecting. Again, thank you both. You are doing such incredible things. And I think it's so beautiful to also see how you are doing this on top of your already busy, crazy schedules, but doing it in a way where you are using your God-given gifts of being driven and still prioritizing your own self-care, not becoming so self-reliant that you're just pushing through everything, but really implementing the things that you have learned to care for your body and help other women to do the same.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It's been wonderful, Kylie. We love your podcast.
Thank you.
Beautiful souls, thank you again for journeying with me. If you have been blessed by this episode, it would mean the world to me if you would leave a review. Be sure to screenshot it, share it on your social media stories, and don't forget to tag me on Instagram or Facebook at Kylie M. Hine. Stay persistent in prayer, protect your peace, and as always, share the light of Christ with everyone around you.